Hello, good morning, everyone. We are going to get started right away. Let's begin with some quick review of some of the things we've talked about last class. Here is a 3D model, and you can access the 3D model from your Luminate page. Go to Lecture 6, Study Resources, 3D Models, and the one I'm looking at right now is the sagittal uh, cut of the brain. Okay, so this is the medial side of the right half of the brain, and I'm actually going to rotate it to the other side here. So you're looking at it from the back in this view, and let's go through some of the structures that are visible here. We have the cerebellum at the back, and you can kind of see it like that on the side as well. The cerebellum, we briefly wrote it down last time, but we'll go into more details today. It's responsible for maintaining posture and balance, and it helps store muscle memories for you as well. Uh, on the side of the brain, again, we're looking at the right half of the brain, the right hemisphere. You can see there are various grooves and various bumps, the grooves. They are called the sulcus, and the bumps they are called gyri, right? And everybody's gonna have slightly different groove patterns and bumps in their brain, but there are several ones that are very distinct in everybody's brain, and starting with this particular one right here. Okay, so that one is the central sulcus. You have all this already. If you have the brain that we labeled last time, maybe you can put it next to you to kind of reference a little bit. That's where the central sulcus is. And of course, in front of it, this particular region right here, that is going to be the actually, I should erase that. Doesn't show up exactly the way I want it to be. Okay, so in front of the central sulcus is going to be your there we go. Primary motor cortex. This is where you're gonna have uh, voluntary control of your body. But remember, the right half of the brain controls the left half of the body, right? And over here, behind the central sulcus, you have the primary somatosensory cortex, which is responsible for processing information related to sensation from the skin, so temperature, pain, touch, texture, all those things would be processed over here in the primary somatosensory cortex. Of course, we have the frontal lobe right here. That's where you would have the higher processing power, speech, abstract thought, personality, everything that's kind of make us human occurs at the frontal lobe. And in this region here, uh, which lobe would that be? This is the frontal lobe right here. What is the lobe at the back here? Does anybody know? We have a small class so far. Maybe you can let me know what the lobe is. Yep, that would be the parietal lobe. Very good, parietal lobe. And that's primarily for processing sensory information that are coming from the skin, as I mentioned. On the side here, we have the temporal lobe, which is for auditory and olfactory input. Auditory is sound, olfactory is smell. And at the back right here, we have the occipital lobe for vision. Okay, so those are the key lobes right there. So let me switch to the medial side and see if we recognize anything. Um, we have a band of white matter here. I didn't tell you what the name is yet, but today we will. Just gonna mention it right now. It's called the corpus callosum. And let me see if I can show you the corpus callosum. It's actually a band like this running from the anterior all the way to the posterior, and it allows communication between the two hemispheres. So just pay attention to that. You will see this corpus callosum in every single mid-sagittal cut of the brain. Now, below the uh, corpus callosum is this thing right here. I know they give it a different name, but let me just delete that. That was like a membrane that separates it. But right here, that's the right lateral ventricle in this case. Now, let me see if I can isolate it. You can see it's actually much bigger on the inside, right? But because it's behind, like within the brain itself, within the cerebrum itself, you can't really see the whole thing. Okay? We're just seeing a little bit of it right here. And from that lateral ventricle, it is going to drain through the CSF, the cerebrospinal fluid is going to drain through the interventricular foramen. Again, I'm assuming you have the sheet that we've labeled next to you, okay? So you can refer to it as I explain. The interventricular foramen is going to connect the lateral ventricle to the third ventricle, which is right here. A third ventricle. Let me isolate that for you. You can see it's like that. There's a little hole in the middle of the lateral ventricle. That's because the sides of the lateral ventricle, if I delete that, you can see there is another structure behind it, which is the thalamus. And you have two thalami, one on the right, one on the left, and they need to communicate with each other. So there is like a bundle of cables, if you would, that would go through this hole, and it allows the two thalami to talk to each other. Okay, so lateral ventricle, third ventricle, and then it's going to go drain through the cerebral aqueduct into the fourth ventricle. Right? So fourth ventricle is a triangular thing, and it continues to extend downward. Um, and this is part of your brainstem. We have the medulla oblongata, and of course, this is going to exit the base of the skull, and it will become the spinal cord. In the center of the spinal cord, we talked about that last class, there is going to be a channel that goes all the way to the bottom. That is called the central canal. And the CSF will continue to travel down the central canal and eventually exit at the cauda equina, the little ponytail stuff at the bottom. And then the CSF will come back up and basically surrounds your entire spinal cord and brain with that. So there you have it. I think that's most of the stuff we talked about. And today we're just gonna go and look at other additional structures in the brain, and I'll come back to this model whenever appropriate. But you should study with this model. Okay, it's very interactive. You can select a part and it'll tell you what the name is, and you can right click on it and you can isolate it to see it by itself, or you can hide it and see things that are behind it, right? So it's a nice tool and you can undo it right on the left here, undo to bring it back. It's a nice tool to help orient yourself to see where things are in relation to each other. So today, I don't think we're going to be sticking to many class notes today, but we will go through the PowerPoints. Okay. Again, right, this is the same picture as the 3D model, same view anyways, but yeah, it has a few additional details that's worth mentioning perhaps. You can see the skull here, and underneath the skull, you can see the meninges. There are three layers of the meninges. The white layer right here, that's like touching the brain, that would be the pia mater. And then this grayish area, that's where the subarachnoid space will be, along with the subarachnoid mater, with the arachnoid mater rather. And then one layer outside of that would be your dura mater, which is actually two layers here in beige, and it happens to be separated at this location, creating the dural venous sinus, and that's where you will be draining the excess CSF. Couple other things just to reiterate. We have this band here, the corpus callosum, It's a bundle of white matter that allows the two hemispheres to communicate with each other. And of course, that leads into the lateral ventricle. We have the third ventricle. And then here we have another label. It's a little bit confusing, but I'll explain later. All right. This here at the back, that's the thalamus. And then in front of the thalamus, that's where the third ventricle is. The third ventricle is like an empty space, right? Chamber, right? So it's the space in front of the thalamus. I'll explain more when I get to that slide. A couple other things you might notice are these like cavities in the bones. Those are actually your sinuses. We learn about sinuses in the respiratory system. They help warm up the air, helps add some moisture to it as we inhale. Okay. So once again, at the back we have the cerebellum, okay, and then that little distinctive triangle shape right here. That is the fourth ventricle. All right. So again, study the diagram yourself. Google up more pictures. The more diagrams you look at, the easier it is for you to remember the names of all these things. All right, cerebrum. Cerebrum is basically the largest portion of the brain in humans. You can see um, this is the whole thing is the brain, but the cerebrum is this part right here. Okay, cerebrum. Okay, the little brain at the back, that's the cerebellum. We'll get to that later, but don't confuse the two names. And you can see it's folded up like this. We have the gyrus, which is the bump, and then the sulcus would be the groove. Plural for gyrus is gyri, R-I instead of R-U-S, and then sulci would be the plural for sulcus. The cerebrum is the last center to receive sensory input and carry out integration before commanding a voluntary motor response. So what that basically means is everything that we feel, everything that we picked up from our surrounding, either with your eyes, with your ears, with your nose, with your skin, ultimately, they will all end up somewhere in the cerebrum. Depending on which kind of sensory information it is, it will end up at different locations. If it's related to vision, it's going to go to the occipital lobe. If it's related to smell, it's going to end up at the, temporal lobe, right? So it will get distributed to the correct lobes of the cerebrum. And in those lobes, there will be integration happening. Integration, it's where the interneuron, it's processing the information and decide what to do with it. Sometimes you don't have to do anything, right? And sometimes you need to, you know, respond by, moving a body part or secreting a hormone or changing the size of your pupil, right? So all these actions that comes in response to the input, those actions are called motor responses. Not all of them are necessarily voluntary, and some of them are involuntary, they're reflexes. That just happens. Like if it's bright, your pupil already automatically gets smaller. That's an involuntary output. Right? Nevertheless, it's still a kind of motor response. The cerebrum also communicates with and coordinates activity with other brain parts. It doesn't act on its own. Often, what you're seeing and what you're hearing, those two pieces of information, even though it's processed at different lobes, they needs to be um, cross-referenced and put together to have a better sense of what's really going on. Like, sometimes if you watch a movie and if you're watching it in like a different language, but you're watching in like English dub or something. So like you're hearing English, but then you can see the lips, the people moving, it doesn't quite match what they're saying. Then there's something off about it, right? And that's an example of where the frontal the occipital lobe is processing one thing, we're seeing the lips moving, and then the temporal lobe is hearing something, and then they don't really agree with each other, and then that creates confusion in the brain sometimes. So that's the cerebrum right there. If you look at the brain from the top, there is a really deep groove that separates the two hemisphere. This groove is called the longitudinal fissure. Longitudinal fissure. Right? It runs right there, dividing the brain into left hemisphere and right hemisphere. If you stick your hand into the longitudinal fissure, you will eventually hit the corpus callosum that I have been telling you about. Okay, corpus callosum right here. And you can recognize the big gap below the corpus callosum, right? That big gap is where it will lead to the lateral ventricle. Okay, and the corpus callosum, actually, if you look at it from from a coronal view, I think I have a picture of that perhaps. Uh, Let me just close this first. Sagittal coronal view. Coronal is this way, right, front and back. You can see it a little bit better, right? So in the other model, we're just looking at a bit of a corpus callosum, but the corpus callosum actually is connected to a vast network of white matter. So all these white matters are cables, right? So if this part of the brain wants to communicate with this part of the brain, it's going to have to send a signal through the white matter and then through the corpus callosum, and then it will go to the other side of the uh, of the um, of the hemisphere, okay? This groove right here that divides the left and the right here, that's the longitudinal fissure, right? So that's what I was saying. Like if you stick your hand into the longitudinal fissure, you're gonna hit the corpus callosum right there eventually. Okay, underneath the corpus callosum, once again, you can see the uh, left and right lateral ventricle, but of course it has been cut, so you don't see the full C shape. And in the middle, that's where the third ventricle is. All right. Functions of the cerebral cortex. Okay, so cortex means the outer layer of an organ. So in this case, we are talking about the outer layer of the cerebrum. That's why it's called the cerebral cortex. Later on, when we talk about other organs like the kidney also has like the renal cortex. Anytime you see cortex, it just means outside. Right? So the cerebral cortex is very thin. It's certainly much thinner than the white matter. You can see here, this part here, the gray matter. That's the cortex, okay? And all this stuff on the inside, that's white matter, right? So relatively speaking, the cerebral cortex is quite thin, but it has over 1 billion cell bodies in that gray matter, and it's where you will be doing very high level integration of all the senses that you are receiving from various sensory organs. It's responsible for voluntary movement from the frontal lobe, and it also keeps us conscious. Right? Uh, every time we receive sensory input from our surrounding, that's what keeps our brain stimulated, and keep our mind aroused, so that we're not going to be like falling asleep or not responding. You probably are familiar with this picture because we labeled it last time. Once again, we have the frontal lobe, and at the back of the frontal lobe, you can see the primary motor cortex, which is located on like this strip here, right? Actually has a name. It's called the precentral. We labeled this already, but let's write down again. Precentral gyrus. That's the name of this bump. And on this gyrus, you're going to find the primary motor cortex for voluntary movement of the body. Similarly, behind the central sulcus, you will have another gyrus. This one is called the post-central gyrus. And that's where you will find the somatosensory cortex. Now, before I forget, I actually should be giving you this thing. Okay, 1 second, guys. I mean, it's in lab number 2 if you want to look at that. But we took more videos, me and TJ, the other teacher. Um, I just posted in the chat, so maybe you want to take a moment and just bookmark them. That's the videos of you know, us explaining the brain parts in the model. Uh, Again, you can find them in the lab number 2 PowerPoint deck, slide deck, but I posted in the chat for you to look at if you want to, bookmark them. Anyways, so occipital lobe, temporal lobe. We have another fissure here. This is the lateral fissure. Okay, this is the central sulcus, just dividing the brain into different regions. Okay, and then that's pretty much it. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the primary motor cortex and the primary somatosensory cortex. Don't memorize, primary motor cortex is on the left and then somatosensory cortex is on the right. It doesn't work like that. It depends on which way the brain is facing, right? In this case, the front is right here. You can tell which way is the front, which way is the back by looking at the location of the cerebellum. So this is the front, and the primary motor cortex is on the left side, right? And in this particular brain, there's the cerebellum, and this is the front now. So that's why this strip is the primary motor cortex, and this is the primary somatosensory cortex, right? And of course, dividing it is the central sulcus. Now, to help visualize this, like we're taking a slice of the brain out, okay? Much like taking a book off the shelf. You're sliding it out and you're seeing, the slice of it. Okay? So if you take the primary motor cortex out, it will be a slice like this, and you can see the cerebral cortex, which is like the darker color stuff here. That's the gray matter. That's where all the cell bodies are. And then the white matter, once again, it's for transmitting of signal, right? So on the primary motor cortex, I'll explain what this guy is. Just like try to focus on this for a second. On the primary motor cortex, the different location is mapped to different parts of the body. So like on the side, like around here where my finger is, okay, that's gonna be the place that's responsible for controlling your tongue, okay? And then this is controlling stuff on your face. This is for controlling your hand. And then this is for controlling the leg, right, and the foot. And if you have trouble visualizing that, let me try to explain to you in this diagram. Maybe it's really hard to show. So over here, you can see the longitudinal fissure is here. So like this region that is inside the longitudinal fissure, that would be for the control of the leg. Okay, although I'm actually looking at the postcentral gyrus right here, so this would be for like sensation from the leg. But if you move a little bit forward, that would be for movement of the leg. Okay, so same thing here for the primary somatosensory cortex. Right? It's pretty much similar body parts, and over here is again where the foot is, and that's the genitalia, and it's kind of dangling inside the longitudinal fissure portion of the brain. Right, that's where the uh, uh, cell bodies are for controlling the foot and the leg, so on and so forth. All right. Now, this here is the right half of the brain. So this would be the left hand that you will be controlling. Okay, the signal is gonna go through the white matter, it's gonna go down the spinal cord, and then it's gonna control the other side of the body. Right? So primary motor cortex is for voluntary movement. Primary somatosensory cortex is for feelings, sensations from those body parts. Now, the in terms of number of neuronal connections, it's not equally distributed. Okay, there are more neurons going to and coming from certain body parts than others. So, to represent this visually, there is this very famous diagram. It's called the homunculus model, right? Which is which means like little man. So this is what we look like to our brain, and the size of those body parts corresponds to how many neurons are going to and coming from those body parts. Because we do a lot of things with our hands and we are very dexterous with our hands, that is very big, meaning lots of neurons are going to the hands and coming from there. So you can have fine control of your fingers and you can feel very small details with your fingertips, right? Um, Lower lips are also very sensitive. I'm not sure why. Uh, Tongue, right, with all the taste that you can taste from the tongue, not just taste, right, but like temperature and texture and all those things as well. Uh, it's also highly populated with neurons. Not so much from the core of the body. Okay, and here is something you can try to at home, with someone to kind of illustrate this concept. You can take two pencils or pens, okay, and then you ask the other person to close their eyes, and with the finger laid out like that. Yeah, so the other person is closing their eyes. So you will poke their fingertips with either one pencil, or you can poke them with two pencils really close to each other. Okay, just poke them with it like that. Okay, and then you're gonna ask them to tell you whether you are poking them with one pencil or two pencils. Right? They will be able to tell with the fingertips. Now, if you repeat the same experiment, but you try it on their lower back, then they will not be able to tell. Okay? And that illustrates an important point that there are more neurons going to your fingertips than going to the lower back. That's why you have higher resolution, so to speak, with your fingertips than with your lower back. With that said, people who are visually impaired, if they're blind, for example, how do they read? Right? What do we call the things they read with their fingertips?
The braille.
Mhm. The brailles, right? So that's why they use the fingertips is because it's very, very sensitive, right? To those bumps and on the braille. And I came across this story. It's an old story, 2013. I think the link still works. You can check it. So there is a student in Hong Kong who is blind, and her particular condition uh, causes her to not be able to feel the brailles with the fingertips. Okay, so she's not able to, read the braille that way. But she taught herself how to read the braille with her lower lips. Okay, because as you can see, the lower lips is also very, very sensitive, right? And she actually was able to. They have to write like these public exams to graduate high school in Hong Kong, and she was able to score the top 5% of everybody who wrote it, right? And it was, it's kind of an inspirational story for someone who, self-taught herself to read the brailles with the lips, and it's of course very challenging, right? And yet she's able to succeed. Anyway, if you're interested in that story, uh, you can watch it, well, read about it yourself. Okay, so primary motor cortex is located in the frontal lobe, just in front of the central sulcus. Voluntary commands to skeletal muscle begins at this location. Anytime you move any body parts, voluntarily. It has to come from that location. If you have a stroke at those points, then you would not be able to control certain parts of the body. As I pointed out, each part of the body is controlled by a certain section on the primary motor cortex, and the right primary motor cortex controls the left side of the body and vice versa. Okay? The somatosensory cortex, which is behind the central sulcus, it's located in the parietal lobe, and that is important for sensation from skin, from muscle, and just like the primary motor cortex, it's divided into different zones, and it's also receiving information from the other half of the body. Now, within each lobe, there are these association areas, which is where the integration and memories are kind of stored. So in the somatosensory association area, it basically analyze the things that you are touching. Right? So, if you touch the back of the calculator here, oh, I know it's smooth, and then I'm not even looking, and then I touch here, there is like a little bump here, right? So that's where the processing is happening. It's happening in the association area. And if you close your eyes and let you touch different things, you can probably guess what you are touching in a lot of cases. Okay, if it's a familiar object to you, right? I can give you a mug and you touch it and you feel it and you're like, with your eyes closed, you're like, oh, it's a mug. Okay, I recognize this is the handle. So those kinds of um, memories associated with that particular senses is also happening in the association area. Okay. So like you remember how it feels like to touch certain object, that kind of memory is going to be in some cases stored in these association areas. Same thing for visual association area. It's processing visual information. If you see a person's face and you recognize them, right, that's the face of that person. Right? It's stored in the association area. Similarly with sound, okay, like if you hear certain sound, uh, you recognize your own ringtone, you know your phone is ringing because you recognize the ringtone. That's a type of memory associated with sound, and to process that information, it's going to be happening within the association area of that lobe. All right. Not a lot of people here today. Let's see if you guys are up for the polls. Which lobe process auditory information? Auditory is sound. Okay. Doesn't look like you guys are up for the polls. That's fine. It's the temporal lobe. A temporal lobe. You guys must be swarmed this week, right? Am I correct? It must be like the 10,000 tests going on, right? There's a quiz today for me, and I imagine you guys must have like, big tests and midterms and whatnot in other courses. Yep. Okay. That's okay. Yeah. Thank you for coming though. I really appreciate it. Okay. Which of the following structure allows communication between the two hemispheres? Okay. So that would be the corpus callosum, that white band that is found in the sagittal section of the brain. All right, moving on, we have the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. We label these on the brain last time. Uh, right here. I think we labeled it, yeah, right there. So that's the Broca's area, that's the Wernicke's area. They are typically located on the left side of the brain for most people. And the two areas are important for allowing communication between people, between humans. Starting with the Broca's area, that is also called the motor speech area. And like I said, it's located on the left frontal lobe for most people. Some people have it on the right. And it allows the production of articulate speech in a clear and fluent manner. So when you speak, you're able to use the right word in the right context, and be able to control the way that your vocal cords, your tongues, your lips, how they move to create a specific sound or intonation. All of that stuff is basically happening in the Broca's area. And of course, it needs to communicate with the primary motor cortex because to talk, to move the tongue, the lips, and everything, that requires voluntary control of the muscles, and that happens in the primary motor cortex. If a person has damage to the Broca's area, then they would develop what's called Broca's aphasia, right, or expressive aphasia. Aphasia in this case is the inability to communicate. There are different kinds of aphasia. This one is problem with expressing yourself, okay? And they're not going to be able to speak properly. So this is a transcript of a person with Broca aphasia, and the person was being asked to describe what's happening in the picture, and you can see the the language is really broken. There's a lot of like pause. It's like they're trying to look for the right words, and it's just not spoken in a fluent, articulate manner, right? So people with Broca's aphasia, like if you are like a close person to them, like a relative or someone who lives with them, you learn to understand what they're saying. But to someone who's like, never met them before and they try to talk to them, then, it wouldn't really make much sense. So that's Broca's area. Wernicke's area is located also on the left side for most people, and it's part of the temporal lobe. And in this case, it allows the person to understand written as well as spoken words. And if the person damaged the Wernicke's area, then they have Wernicke's aphasia or receptive aphasia. They will have trouble understanding other people. So, like I said, the two areas work together to allow human communication. There's this story about this person, Phineas Gage. He was a railway worker in the 1800s, and he's described as a very nice person, very punctual, hardworking for his work. But one day there was an accident that there was like an explosion that causes one of these metal rods to shot up his face. Okay, and as you can see in this skull, it enters from just below his left eye, and then it went right through and came out at the top of the head. The rod did not went all the way through. If it did, he probably would die because then, he would bleed to death, right? But the thing went in and then it got stuck. And that was probably what saved him. So, they rushed him to the hospital, I guess, and they cut off whatever they could. And left a rod in his head, because taking it out would mean killing him. And then what happened was, the doctor noticed uh, his personality had a big shift. The way that he was behaving was like as if he was a completely different person. Obviously, there was a lot of trauma going on, right? A traumatic experience with this rod stuck in your head. But aside from that, there was a drastic shift in his personality in general. And that's when they try to figure out if it was the frontal lobe that's responsible for personality and um, and 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 they started to study more about the damage to the frontal lobe and the changes in behavior in the person. So we can look him up. I think his skull is preserved and in some museum. All right, now we're gonna shift our focus to some of the deeper structures that are located inside the brain. So here we go. It's this picture again, and we're gonna be looking at some of the additional features that you cannot see on the surface. Starting with the thalamus. Okay? So the thalamus is two kind of oval egg-shaped structure that are made up of gray matter. And if I look at this picture here, this is a coronal cut separating it from the front and the back. You can see we have the third ventricle right here, and flanking the third ventricle, these two things, those are your left and right thalamus. Okay, let me isolate it. This is just the uh, uh, back half of it, right? Um, because we cut it in the front and back, right? So we're missing the front portion of it. But the two thalami makes up the wall of your third ventricle. Let me see if there is a better picture over here on the other model, the sagittal view right here. So over here, when I point to this structure, right, the space in front of it, once again, it's the third ventricle, but when I delete that, then you can see the thalamus is right behind it. Okay, so isolate, that's the whole thalamus. It's like this, once again, this oval, excuse me, oval shape gray matter. Now in the PowerPoint, you can see pointing at it. Okay, so it says third ventricle here, and then this says the thalamus, right? On a test situation, if I ever point to this, you can always choose thalamus instead of third ventricle. Okay, if I'm pointing to it on the test, it's always going to be the thalamus. But understand that the third ventricle is in front of it. One way to visualize this is think of a box, right? If I look at the box like this, the back of the box, that's where the thalamus is, and then the empty space in front of it, that's your third ventricle. In this picture here, the dark space right here, that's the third ventricle, and then these ovals that are flanking it on the side, those would be your um, thalami. So what does it do? The thalamus is on the receiving end for all sensory input except smell. Smell just goes directly to the temporal lobe, but everything else has to go through the thalamus first. Um, and it's a relay center that will project the information to the appropriate lobes in the brain. And it also helps filter out information that are not particularly important. Okay? So you don't actually process everything that you see, you don't process everything that you hear. Your brain automatically filters out a lot of the noises that are not needed, that doesn't require your attention. Otherwise, if we process everything, we're gonna have sensory overload. There's a video clip here that I want to show you. Let's see if it's gonna work. Okay, so oh, you have to wait for the commercial to finish first. Just give it a moment. Okay, so I'm not sure if you have seen this video before. Okay, let me just share the sound with you. All right, so I'm gonna show you a video, and the video is asking you to count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. Okay, so here we go.
The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half miss the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
Right? So I don't know if you've seen this video before, and if you have heard about it, like the video said, maybe you saw the gorilla, but then you missed the other details, right? So the point that I'm trying to make, or the video is trying to make, is that when we are tasked with a particular objective, in this case, counting the balls, then counting the time number of times the ball is being passed, your brain is focused on that task, and everything else, your thalamus kind of filter out for you. Okay. Like you're like, okay, I have to count the ball one time, two times. And then even though, there's the gorilla coming onto the screen, even though the colors is changing, you might not be picking those information up because subconsciously the thalamus filters those things out for you. Do you understand? I'm just curious. Have you guys seen this video before, or it's new to you?
Oh, I've seen it one time.
One time, yeah, okay. Yeah. So again, it's an interesting thing to relate to illustrate the importance of the thalamus, right? Same thing as studying at the cafeteria, you will zone out the sound of people chattering, right? Because you're so focused on a particular task. All right, that's the thalamus. And then we have the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, hypo means under, and the hypothalamus is below the thalamus in this case, and it's quite small, but a very important part of your brain. It is related to maintaining homeostasis in the body through secretion of hormones. And we'll learn about the hypothalamus in more detail in lecture 12. But it's closely working with another structure called the pituitary gland. And together they secrete a whole bunch of hormones that will help regulate things like your metabolism, your water level in the body, salt concentration, um, and so on and so forth. Okay, so for now, the key things to know is they help maintain homeostasis through hormonal secretion. Now I have the model here. Let's take a closer look. Okay, so third ventricle, thalamus, hypothalamus, right here, and then pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is separated into the anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. They do different things. We'll learn about it later, but collectively, they help regulate a lot of the autonomic processes that are going on in the body related to homeostasis. The brainstem. The brainstem has three parts to it. There is the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. So midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. Okay, the fourth ventricle is flanked between the pons and the medulla, and then the cerebellum at the back right here. Okay, so whole thing is the brainstem. Right, this whole thing, midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. They have overlapping functions, and a lot of them is responsible for various reflexes that are going on in the body. If you take a closer look at the picture here, you can see there are these cranial nerves that are coming out from various locations of the brainstem. Just to remind you, there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves that are coming out from the brainstem, and they are responsible for controlling various uh, stuff, either like eye movements, or they are responsible for picking up sounds. There's a whole slide for it in lecture 5, but you don't have to memorize what does what. Okay, so midbrain and pons, they act as relay station to communicate for communication between various parts of the body, specifically the cerebrum and the spinal cord, as well as the cerebellum. And they have reflex centers for visual, auditory, and tactile response. An example of visual reflex is if you see something flashing, your head automatically turns and look at it, right? That's a reflex. Same thing, if you hear a loud bang in the kitchen, then automatically you kind of jump a little bit and then you look in that direction, right? That's a reflex that is carried out by the cranial nerves located in the midbrains and the pons. Tactile is related to touch. Um, if it, like sometimes if you touch something that causes you to recoil because you are afraid of it. For example, like my kid just picked up something from the floor. She thought it was like a little dust ball, but it turns out to be like a bug. And then she just like, recoil and jump and scream, right? That's a tactile response, okay? And part of it is carried out in the midbrain and the pons. The medulla oblongata is located at the base of the brainstem, where it is transitioning to the spinal cord. We already learned about the medulla before. That's where the respiratory center is located for detecting carbon dioxide in the blood, for example. But there are additional functions such as controlling how forceful your heartbeat is going to be. And there are also various reflex centers, okay, for swallowing, coughing, vomiting, and sneezing. All these reflexes are carried out at the medulla oblongata. 90% of the tracts that are coming up or going down in the spinal cord will cross the midline within the medulla oblongata. The remaining 10% will cross elsewhere in the body, or sometimes they don't cross at all. Now, there's this thing called a reticular formation. The reticular formation is an other web of gray matter, and it's kind of running along the midbrain. And what that does is it basically receives various sensory stimuli and project them throughout the brain so that it keeps us awake, right? And when we are sleeping, the reticular formation is kind of quietly functioning in the background. If it doesn't require your attention, it's not gonna wake you up. But if you again hear something loud bang, something falling in the kitchen, or like your kid crying, then the reticular formation is gonna basically wake you up from the sleep, and you're gonna go check out what's happening, right? If you damage the reticular formation, then this function is not possible. You're not gonna be able to arouse the brain, and you might slip into a coma. All right, moving on, we have the cerebellum. The cerebellum is located at the back, right here. And in front of it, you can see the distinct triangle structure. That's the fourth ventricle. The cerebellum is about the size of a plum, and it has more neurons, neuronal connections in the cerebellum than the rest of the brain combined. And it's really important for fine motor control of your body parts. So I'm going to give you 3 functions of the cerebellum. Number 1, maintain balance and posture. When you are doing certain things, your cerebellum and your brain has a reference picture of what your body is expected to be in. Okay, so like if you're sitting, you are expected to to be in this position. So your brain is constantly receiving inputs from all over the body, and it's checking that, okay, your legs are this way, your center of gravity is here, and then there is something supporting the butt. This is the expected position for someone who's sitting. So, if someone comes behind you and knock the chair out of you, then you start falling, and then all the signal is going to the brain that tells you we are no longer in the sitting position. Okay, it's not what we're expecting, so we need to try to readjust ourselves. Yeah, so you might put your hands to the back to kind of break the fall. Sometimes you cannot rebalance yourself. Right? If someone pulls a chair behind you, you're definitely gonna fall. But if you're walking, okay, and you trip on a rock or something, then your body is gonna try to readjust is itself so that you don't fall down, and that is happening in the cerebellum. Coordinating muscle movement, if you try to execute a series of commands, movements, such as shooting a basketball, all that motion requires a coordination of various body parts, and that coordination happens in the cerebellum. The uh, ability to control these body parts comes from the primary motor cortex, but to allow smooth, seamless execution of those movements, that involves the cerebellum. People who damages the cerebellum often is being described as walking around drunk, because they lack that coordination. They lack that ability to execute movement in a seamless, coordinated manner. Finally, it helps store skill memory or muscle memory, such as typing. Okay, you can type without looking at the keyboard. That's stored in the cerebellum. If you try to type on a different keyboard, sometimes you will hit a key that is on the keyboard that you're familiar with, only to realize is the wrong key on this unfamiliar new keyboard, right? So you would have there is like an adjusting period where you need to rewire the cerebellum connection to get used to the new keyboard, right? Riding a bike, playing video games, pressing those buttons, those are examples of store of skill memories, and they're stored in the cerebellum. Okay, before we talk about the limbic system, let's go to our study guide. I think there is another brain, an additional brain that we need to label. So let me copy it over. Hold on, nothing is working. Anyways, I'll just label it here first, and then I'll copy it over. So there are lots of stuff here, and some of them we have not talked about. So I'm just gonna cross them out. You don't have to know this. You don't have to know that. G, where's G? Okay, I think those are it for now. Let's uh let's label the rest of it, okay? So, let's, do you guys recognize anything from the diagram? Maybe you can help me out a little bit. Just say a letter and then tell me what it might be. Okay, E is the thalamus. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so over here, let's label it. This is thalamus. Okay, and let's just put some quick description here. It's the relay center for sensory input, except smell though, right? except smell. So that's the thalamus. It's gray matter and it forms the side of the third ventricle. Okay, like if the room you're in right now is the third ventricle, then that wall on your left and that wall on your right, right? Those are the thalami. And the floor would be the hypothalamus. Okay, so that's good. Okay, Vivian has another two. Yeah, we have the cerebellum right here at the back. That is M. Yeah. So cerebellum is maintain posture and balance. Smooth execution of movements. Store skill memories. Okay, we have the little triangle here. You probably sick of hearing me say the triangle, but that is that is the fourth ventricle, right? Fourth ventricle. Anything else that you recognize at all? Hey, how about F? Been talking about F for a few times already. Okay, so F is, yeah, that's right, the corpus callosum. Corpus means a bundle. Callosum, I don't know what callosum means. Corpus callosum, it is bundle of white matter for communication between the hemispheres. In some forms of epilepsy, they might cut part of the the corpus callosum, okay, to prevent the spread of the seizure from one half of the brain to the other. Okay, there is a duct right here connecting the third ventricle to the fourth. I believe that is J. Cerebral aqueduct. Let's take a look at the lobes right here. Roughly, that would be the occipital lobe. This is for visual info. Occipital lobe. Okay, roughly there. That would be the parietal lobe. This is for somatosensory info, feelings from the skin and the muscle. This here would be the frontal lobe. So like voluntary movement, speech, and some other stuff if you want to add later. And we cannot see the temporal lobe, right? Because the temporal lobe is on the side. We're looking at the brain from the middle. Can't see it in this view. Okay, how about that? What is this thing that's underneath the thalamus? And then, further down from there, the angle is another part right there. That's right, that's the hypothalamus right here, the blue. And then connected to the hypothalamus is the pituitary gland, which is, oh, I cannot see. Oh, it's R right here, pituitary gland. So they maintain homeostasis through hormones. That's all you have to know for now. There's a little thing right here that's in front of the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. We haven't learned it yet. I'm just gonna label it. We will learn that more uh, in the optic in the eyes lesson. It's called the optic chiasma. And that's where your optic nerves from both eyes will cross the middle. Okay, more on this later. All right, we have three things right here. Okay, this one. This one. And then one more. Okay. Over here, this is the midbrain. Under the midbrain, it is the pons. And then at the very bottom is the medulla oblongata. Okay, so these ones, these three things makes up the brainstem. Medulla oblongata contains breathing center, reflex centers, or swallowing, coughing, right? Vomiting. And then 90% of the tracks will cross the midline here. Okay. Now there's another structure right here. I know I crossed it out, but I just remember we will have to learn it later on. It's located there. I'll show you on the 3D model in a second. That's the pineal gland. And it secretes melatonin. Okay. Melatonin makes you sleepy. I'll just quickly show you. It's right here. That's the guy. Pineal body or gland uh, secretes melatonin. So that's pretty much everything. I guess we can add this location is LV, lateral ventricle. Sorry. All right. Any questions at all before we move on? All right. Uh, we're gonna finish up with the PowerPoint slides. Okay, the next thing we're gonna talk about is the limbic system. The limbic system. So the limbic system is an ancient system in the nervous system. It's one of the most kind of primitive system that has always been there to drive our survival instinct. And it does so by creating a reward system for the brain. If you do things that enhances your survival, those pathways will release neurotransmitters and hormones that makes you feel good about it, so you want to do it again. And if you are experiencing things that has a negative impact on your survival, or it hurts you, or it puts you in a dangerous situation, then the brain will makes you uh, basically creates emotions of fears and resentment to those things, and you want to avoid it, right? And the limbic system consists of four structures. Okay, so the first one is called the hippocampus, which is where long-term memory are stored, as opposed to like skill memory, right? And there's the hypothalamus, amygdala, and thalamus. So to remember it, think of like a hippo, as in the hippocampus, hippopotamus, the hippo wearing a hat, okay, H-A-T. So hippocampus for storing long-term memory, hypothalamus is for a lot of the autonomic processes that are happening, secreting hormones that makes you feel a certain way. There is the amygdala. That's how you pronounce this one. The amygdala. That's for emotions. You want to associate emotions to your experience. Things that have no emotional relevance, they tend to get filtered out, and it takes effort to remember those things. And then thalamus, help filters the information, the memories that are coming in as well, right? So, for example, like, do you remember what you had for dinner last Tuesday? Anybody remember what they had for dinner last Tuesday? I'm trying to think about it, right? Chances are you don't remember. Okay, I don't remember either, right? Why don't you remember? Well, because last Tuesday was just probably like any other Tuesday, right? Like it wasn't anything special. There's no emotion associated with that dinner, perhaps, and we're just going through the motions, and we don't remember. Even if you try to remember it, like if you think really hard, maybe you can recall it, but probably not. Okay. But if I asked you, what did you had for dinner on your last birthday, right? Or on your kid's last birthday, right? Then you might remember because probably maybe it was something special, right? It was a special event. There was emotion associated with it, right? Happiness, excitement, all those things, and you tend to remember them better. And so the limbic system use these emotions to associate them with certain behavior that you experience. If it enhances survival, it gives you good emotions. If it uh, decreases your chances of survival, it gives you negative emotions. And ultimately, these things becomes instinct for you to engage in certain activities or avoid certain activities. So over here, you can see that's the thalamus. And if we follow the thalamus, there's on top of it, anyways, there is the hippocampus. And if we go further down, sorry, the hippocampus goes all the way down here. And we can see at the tip of the hippocampus, that's where the amygdala is going to be. Let me see if I can show you on the 3D brain here. I think we might have to cut away a few things in order to see it. You can actually search them up as well. Hippocampus there, and then it will take you right to it, and you can isolate it if you want. So you see, that's the hippocampus right here, and at the tip of it, how do I unhide it? Oh, right there. Okay, so you might have to cut away a bunch of things, and then you might be able to see it. Okay, sorry. It's really buried deep in there. There we go. Okay, that's the hippocampus, and at the tip of it, that's the right amygdala, right? Let me delete a few other things for you. That's what you can play with when you are doing this on your own. Okay, hippocampus right there, and then amygdala right there, part of your limbic system. Okay, so that's what it does, the limbic system. Like for example, if you like if you're going out on a walk, if you're like me and you run into a dog and then the dog bit me that time. So now that was a negative experience for me. Right? And now when I go run outside, when I see a dog down the street, I automatically, like I don't even think about it. My body just tells me to, go on the other side of the street, right? So that's basically my limbic system acting up, right? Previously, I had a negative engagement with that thing, and it caused me harm. So I want to steer away from it. Okay. Um, what are the things that you do that enhances your survival? Eating, right? Foraging. Right? In the past, before modern lives, people have to go hunt for food, right? So they rely on the limbic system to guide their hunting behavior, right? Like there's like certain risks associated with hunting, especially if you are trying to bring down big games. It's dangerous, but then the reward and the risk balance. That's something that your limbic system is going to help calculate for yourself. Now, before we go to the next slide, in modern lives, sure, we still have these instinctive behavior, but we are rarely in a situation where it's life and death, right? Every day we go on. It's we don't really need the limbic system to help guide our survival to the same level that it used to be. And so the limbic system has kind of evolved in, into creating other problems. Okay, so a lot of addiction actually lights up the limbic system. So there are certain activities that people do that makes them feel good, but not necessarily good for them, like smoking, for example, right? Cannabis, right? So all these things lights up the reward system, lights up the limbic system, and makes them crave to do it again. Okay. It doesn't even have to be physical consumption of substances, right? What are examples of activities that people do that they could get addicted to? It doesn't have to be, again, physically inhaling or consuming things. It could be a certain behavior that people are addicted to. Do you guys have any examples or know what I'm talking about? Scrolling through social media, yeah, like the phone, right? Phone. Like, people can't live with their phone. A lot of times they have to find a phone. Right? You're waiting in line for at the grocery stop. I mean, you might instinctively take out your phone and start scrolling. You don't even know why you're scrolling, but you do, right? Okay, that's related to the limbic system. And a lot of the apps, right? That's why they try to ban TikTok, right? They're saying it's, trying to get young people addicted to it, right? Through those algorithms and stuff like that. Right? But other things like, sure, Netflix, yeah, watching shows. I was thinking about like gambling, right? That's another example, right? Shopping, some people, right? There's many things people get addicted to, and at the root of it, a lot of it has to do with the limbic system, the reward system. Okay, and the neurotransmitters that are associated with these things are dopamine. We talked about, right? Dopamine helps you um, feel good in some cases, right? You eat cookies, makes you feel good. You want to do it again. Eating junk food, right? Um, that's the limbic system. So if you remember from lecture five, right, the dopamine is also needed for fine control movement, and for people with Parkinson disease, they have to up their level of dopamines with various medications, right? And I told you my father has Parkinson disease, and when I read the medication, package, people who are on dopamine therapy, they are actually more prone to getting addiction than others because of the dopamine. Dopamine has dual effects, right? It's also part of the reward system. So yeah, that's something we actually have to watch out for our dads. Like, he enjoys a drink every now and then, but he's not like addicted to alcohol or anything. But then we're telling him, "Well, maybe you should scale down a little bit now that you are on the medication, just in case, right? You get too attached to the alcohol. Anyways, types of memories. We talked about skill memories. These are repetition, motor skills involving the cerebellum. They are very persistent. They don't go away. You don't ride your bike for, 10 years. I give you a bike, you probably will be able to pick it up very quickly. But other memories that requires you to remember factual things, they are called decorative memories. Okay. So these are things you're trying to remember for taking my test. Trying to remember the different names of the brain parts and what they do. All these things are factual stuff that are needed to be stored at the hippocampus, and they are screened by the amygdala. I told you, if something is mundane and it has no emotional attachment to it, you're not gonna be able to remember it very easily, okay? Because your body automatically filters those things out for you. Okay. So, and there's not much emotion associated with these things other than frustration perhaps. And that's why, like, I try to teach through telling you like stories and analogies. because then, there are things that are relatable to you, right? Oh, you might remember that story that he told you, and then, oh, we were talking about dopamine, and, that might help you remember some of these things. And some people, suggest studying, with some light music on, and that kind of lightens the mood. And when you are in a better mood when you're studying, then, the amygdala might not screen out as much of these things, and you might be able to remember it better. Okay. But for long-term memory, even though it's long-term, it's not really long-term. Okay. Like these things you really, for me, is long-term memories. Okay. Because I've been teaching it for, over 15 years. Okay. So like I've said it so many times, it has become long-term memory. But for people who are studying, it's you cram all these things into the head before the test, before the exam. That's short-term memory. You still have to keep on, reviewing them in order to get converted into long-term memories, right? Like if you don't study these things for a month, you're probably not going to remember all the details. And that's once again because it gets filtered out, and it's not useful, right, anymore. So your brain kind of recycles those things for you. And that is all, guys. Okay, that is all for the lesson. I mean, I have a bunch of conceptual questions, but I think you can do that later on, when you're studying for it. So no class next week because it's engagement week. We will reconvene on March 3rd. Okay, that's going to be our next lesson. You have a quiz for me today, and you said you also have the chemistry test. So good luck and enjoy your break next week, guys. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you, bye.